All right, let's get started. Thank y'all so much for joining Building Your Child's Leadership Capacity. We've got an incredible special guest today, Jennifer Arnold, who's with us. And before we get started, and before Jennifer introduces herself, I laughed. Both my parents are lawyers, and they're like, "You've got to do a disclaimer, Peyton, that the only research you've got is your educational background. You're a middle school teacher, so quick disclaimer for all of you, and then let's get going." So, Jennifer, we are so pumped to have you here today. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in education and how you know about building children's leadership capacity?
Absolutely. So I'm Jennifer Arnold. I have spent 7 years in education, first in public schools in rural North Carolina, most recently here in Atlanta at the Lovett School, serving as the lower school chaplain for 4 years. I also have my master's in divinity, during which time I worked with students, kids, juveniles who are incarcerated, and I've just done a lot of work with children in other settings. I currently serve as the Assistant Director of Admissions at the Candler School of Theology.
Awesome. Well, welcome. You've got a lot of good background in working with lots of different types of people. And we've had conversations a little bit about how, particularly at Lovett, you work to help kids build their leadership capacity. And so let's dive in and talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about what is leadership, how all kids can lead no matter who they are, and how it looks different across kids and ages and stages, and then some really key takeaways for parents to do. So let's dive in.
Yeah.
Jennifer, talk a little bit about when you think about what is leadership. What is it?
Yeah, I think there are so many ways that people try to define leadership. I did a Google search just to see what people were saying. And sometimes I think as adults, we think of the person who's in front of the room, the person who's making decisions, person with a lot of authority. And obviously, kids' leadership is going to look different than that. And so I like to think of leadership as using one's ability to influence a situation to create positive change. And that is something kids are really good at. And they do this in, like we're going to say, a whole variety of ways. But there's this quote from Howard Thurman. He's a theologian, kind of grandfather to the civil rights movement, who said, "Don't ask what the world's need, ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is more people who have come alive." And so I think taking that expansive view of leadership is like doing that thing that makes you come alive, where you're using your abilities to influence the world for good. It's just way more encompassing, right? Like we've all met that person who has just been able to listen to us at a time when we're really hard. Maybe that's the thing that makes them, being with people makes them come alive, or sing a song that can transform your heart. Like that might be the thing. There's just so many ways that we influence situations for positive good, and like tuning in not to what the external world is telling us we should do or what we think the world needs, what we're supposed to be, but really listening to that inner compass, I think is key to developing leadership, especially in kids.
Jennifer, I love what you just said about, obviously, I love that Howard Thurman quote too, but I love what you said about helping kids affect positive change and knowing that, that's what leaders do, right? No matter whether you are a CEO in the kind of more traditional leadership, head of the ship type form, or whether it's looking, as you said, at leadership a little bit more expansively, right? Where are you leading already as a child, and having them kind of explore that? I think that's really, really cool. Um, are there any surprising leaders in your life, like, or when you were a child, that, or ways you led as a child that really inspired you in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the person that comes to mind for me was my great aunt Joyce. She, my grandmother died before I was born, so she was kind of like a grandmother figure in my life. And she just was always welcoming people into her home. Like the thing that makes her come alive is just like hosting people in her house. And to this day, if like any of you listening right here today, if I was like, this person is like traveling through Goshen, Indiana today, they need a meal, she'd be like, come over, and just that radical hospitality was the sense of, it is leadership. It is, infecting the world for positive change in her little way, being able to make a meal, make a space where people feel welcome. Um, And she's did that in a whole variety of ways. But for me, that was a real example of just someone tuning into this like one thing that they're really passionate about, and like the huge ripples that it has. I went to Israel when I was in college, and I met people, they had gone to Israel 10 years prior, my great aunt and uncle, and served meals and prepared things at like a kind of guest house there. And somebody came to meet me because they're like, we know that you're Joyce's niece, and so we have to meet you. And just like, yeah, like I said, those ripples when you're just really living into what you're called to do.
I love that so much. And I think it also reminds me, as parents, we're thinking about, okay, how can I cultivate my child's leadership, capacity? Obviously, it's letting them open up to what their gifts are in a lot of ways. But it also sounds like as parents and grandparents and, community leaders, we're modeling what that looks like for kids, and that can really inspire their own leadership in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely. I think
So,
they're gonna, when they see us, they're seeing what is possible for them.
and it's interesting, we've talked a little bit about this, but I think I remember when I was an educator, there was a big push at our school for, hey, how can we open up opportunities for kids to lead? They really took, as you said, a very broad view of leadership. And there were a couple, cynics in the background going like, well, not everyone can lead. There's got to only be one leader. Not all kids have leadership capacity, right? And so I'm thinking, like, I love what you said earlier, but when you think about all kids can lead, can you talk a little bit about how do you, like, if I'm as a parent thinking like, well, my kid's really, he's not really gifted with a lot of charisma, he's not going to be the leader of the pack socially. She's not going to be the lead in the drama performance, or, the star on the soccer team, and she's not going to lead in athletics. How can my child lead? How can all
Yeah.
kids lead? Even this kid over here. What does that look like for you?
I mean, I think giving them options, figuring out what are they doing in their free time, what are they excited about. One thing that I did as the leader of the Student Service Council is we would do every year a toy drive. So across the school, K-12, we are collecting toys for Agape at the holidays. And obviously it would be easy for me to say, I can do all of that myself. I can arrange the times, I can collect the toys. It's not that hard to collect toys and put them in a bin. But you start getting the kids involved, and you're like, your job is to promote this event, to make sure your kids know about it. I think if kids understand the mission, if they understand the why, they will find their place. So I think sometimes we think we have to give them a place, but like they will find their place. So we went over, why is this important? Why kids are really, it's easy to sell them on why toys are important. But and then gave them like, well, what could we do? And so we had kids who wanted to make posters, who really like to draw, don't want to talk, right? Very shy kids, but they can make a poster, and they can talk to maybe their class, remind their classmates, and at morning meeting, you had kids who wanted to be out front of the school, like waving down cars and like, hey, don't forget your toys today. You have kids who would make announcements. We like maybe make an announcement over the intercom. And some kids don't want to talk, right? But they can write something really beautiful, even if they won't read it. You have the people who can organize the boxes. You have the people who, just all kinds of different skills there, that the kid who's organizing the boxes is probably not the kid that's going to be out in front of the school waving the sign, right? Those are two different sets of skills. You've got the quiet kid, you've got the outgoing kid. But like I said, I think if they understand the mission, why it's important, and then we open it up and let them figure out like, well, what could you do about this? Kids are smart, they'll figure it out.
Love that too. So it really hits on a couple things I'm hearing you say. If as I'm a parent, I'm thinking, okay, well, how can I help my child understand that they can lead in out of their own capacity? Sounds like asking the child, right? Putting
Mhm.
some of the onus on the child to say, where do you want to lead? How do you want to contribute? Can really help them start to think about, oh, I am a leader, right? I'm
Mhm.
just going to be able to lead in this way, and helping them broaden that understanding of leadership. And then noticing your child's strengths, noticing where they like to participate and what they're interested in, and then kind of helping support that sounds like something that parents can do. And it also sounds like getting the right environment, right? It's like the artist wants to be over here and the talkers want to be over here. And, if you think about, let me get my kid in the right place, that really feels like it can really help. Are there things that, and we didn't prepare this question, so you can be like, skip if you want to, but are there things when you were teaching that you saw parents do, like if you say, okay, yeah, this kid is doing that, are there things that you either saw parents do that helped those kids be leaders, or things you saw parents do that kind of got in the way of that lead?
I would say help just exposing them to more people, more places, right? The more the more different forms of leadership you're exposed to, the more different ways you can think about yourself. So those kids who were taking the opportunities to go on the field trips, taking the opportunities to spend extra time with teachers, and not in like an overscheduled, overbooked way, but just kind of letting them have opportunities open. Sometimes I feel like parents will say, oh, we can't do that. We have baseball practice and this and this and this. We have all these things, and it's like really scheduled. And there's not a lot of room for the kid to explore to change. And I know there's like, you have to keep your schedule and you pay your penny and all of those things, and all of that is good. But I think if you can build in just some room for flexibility for kids to take the one-off opportunity that comes up, that's not going to happen every week like baseball practices. Like they're going to gain a lot from that. Um, on the similar hand, or the opposite hand, what hurts is, I think sometimes we have an idea. I've seen parents have ideas of what the kid is, right? Like you're trying to figure out the kid's strength, you're going to try and figure out what the right environment is, and then we as adults can be like, this is my artist kid and this is my sports kid, and then like the kid gets kind of pegged into that. So again, just trying to leave some flexibility for them and for yourself, to let the kid not be just one thing, but allowing them to. It's a time of innovation, of growth, a time of exploration. They're not meant to be adults with careers yet.
I think that's huge, and it really does speak a lot to, again, what you mentioned earlier about providing choice, asking your child, creating that space for them to be able to discover it on their own, because leaders are the ones who kind of lead the way, and a lot of times the path has not been made, and if we give our kids opportunity to make their own path instead of snow plowing, then maybe we'll help foster that capacity a little bit more.
Yeah, what you're saying, Peyton, also makes me think of just like the studies coming out about grit, right? And like positive growth mindset of when we were saying, good job, you're such a good baseball player, you're such a good artist. Like it kind of, kids want that affirmation of that thing then, as opposed to some more general noticing statements like, I noticed you were smiling a lot while you were painting, or I noticed you were really happy when you seemed really confident when you were talking in front of the crowd, or just kind of noticing. And because then there's space for them to respond and share how they were experiencing that moment, as opposed to kind of a silent message that like, that's who you are supposed to be.
Wow, that's really powerful, because I think, I've noticed the way that I praise my children, and woo, that gives me I've got some room
It's
for
still a
work.
challenge.
It's a good challenge, because all we want is for the best for our kids. And sometimes we get in our own way, even when we're thinking we're giving them the best, right? I don't know if our listeners have seen this, and I don't know if you've seen this, but have you seen the Simon Sinek video about the dancing guy?
I love it.
For
Yes,
a
the first
follower?
follower.
So if for viewers, if you haven't seen that video, stop this one real quick, go look up Simon Sinek first follower, and then come back and understand what we're talking about. It's a great like 2-minute video about leadership. But we've talked a little bit about how leadership can look different, right? Maybe it's your first follower, maybe it's you're a servant leader and you're leading by example, or you're leading by picking up the trash when nobody else notices. Maybe you're the quiet leader, and as you said, right, the ones who aren't going to be up on stage, but they're going to lead in the background. I love that book, Quiet. I don't know if you read that, but that's another
I
great.
haven't read it, but I've read some summaries of it and it resonates.
Yeah. And so, those are when I thought about, okay, how does leadership look different? Those are some things that cued in my mind about leadership looking different. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about the different ways that leadership looks with kids?
Yeah, I put on here, kids' brains and adults' brains are different. And we don't want our kids' leadership to look like little adults. I listened to a podcast recently and they were just talking about kids having this really exploratory approach, almost like scientists, of trying different things, picking out different things. And so they're not going to be the most, like when you think CEO, if that's your message of leadership, you think someone who's like very driven on one point, going to like stay organized and, oh, sorry, the light in this room just turned off. Sorry. Stay really organized and focused on one driving like motivation. And I think kids are still trying to figure out what that looks like. And sometimes they're like crazy idea that as adults we might poo-poo, it doesn't matter, can actually be like where the magic is. So for me, that's that like yes and attitude of, which is a phrase from if you do, now I can't, what's the word? Improv. Thank you. I was at a show like last week and just lost the word improv, where you take what your partner says and you're like, okay, what can I take from that? And here we go. I love that metaphor for working with kids. So this is not my story, but I've been working for Bagel Rescue, which is a nonprofit here in Atlanta that rescues bagels from bagel shops and redistributes them to all kinds of different community programs, feeding people who are hungry. And I taught the student who inspired this nonprofit Bagel Rescue. I taught him at Levitt. His mom is now the executive director, but it began because during COVID, they wanted to do a meal. They usually did a service project, so that servant leader part, and they were out of, but they couldn't do what they normally went to a soup kitchen. They couldn't do it. It was COVID. Nobody was in person. So his mom called the hospital and said, like, what could we do for the first responders? They said, can you do a breakfast for us? So she told the kids, we're going to go to Costco and we're going to get bagels for all the nurses at the hospital. And this kid said, well, like, we don't like those bagels at Costco. They're not the good bagels. Why would we get those? We should get the ones from down the street. And, us as adult being like, no, it's too expensive. It's not like we need so many, but like, we can't do that. But her yes and attitude is she like listened to him. His next thing he said was like, why don't we tell them it's for a good cause? Why don't we tell them what we're doing? And instead of saying, no, that's not going to work, she's like, okay, like you can call. So he called. He was in 3rd grade. He called and the bagel shop said, sure, we'll give you the day old bagels. And now we're rescuing 15 to 18,000 bagels a week from 46 bagel shops across the city of Atlanta, feeding, thousands of people every week, just because that mom didn't shut down her kid and was like, okay, you have an idea. Let's see where it goes. I think similar things when I was teaching, I had students who were planning an event with Mercy Community Church, which is a church that mostly serves folks who live on the street. And we're like, okay, we want to do something to make them feel special, have a meal. What could we do? It was Fat Tuesday. My students were like, we should have, again, 3rd graders, we should play pin the tail on the leprechaun. And I was like, I'm sorry, but these people who are attending this event are not going to want to play pin the tail on the leprechaun. It's like, but sure enough, like, because the kids, I think, again, that was the thing that made the kids come alive. Like, they were so excited about it. They invited these new friends that they had made at the dinner to come play pin the tail on the leprechaun with them. And they were all having a great time laughing, building these relationships. At the end of the day, there was just so much more humanity shared between them. And it's like, here's this thing, this spark that I see, and I'm not going to shut it down. I'm going to like find a way to try and incorporate it. And that doesn't work for everything, right? There are limits, but like as much as we can to try and say like yes and instead of like no or but, it's going to just open up a whole world of possibility.
Man, you've given me a lot to think about as a parent, because I love, my first reaction to the bagels would be like, no, bud, we're just going to do it my way.
Yeah.
And there are so many opportunities to, as parents, for us to think about like, ooh, what if this is a moment to cultivate my child's ability to lead, right? And to show them that we have faith in them and that we believe in them and that we're supporting them, and be their first follower. I think that's really, really cool.
I think so often it's like as adults, we say we want our kids to lead, but we actually want them to follow us. And that we think if they're following us, then they're going to grow up to be leaders. But if we want them to be leaders, we have to give them the opportunity to actually, like you said, take that responsibility and lead.
Man, that's a quote. Everybody write it on your mirror and, post it up on the wall. Don't forget, parents, because that's absolutely, you're spot on. So you mentioned this book or this podcast, The Self-Driven Child. Can you tell us a little bit
Self-Driven
about?
Child is a book.
Okay.
Yeah. And we read it. We did a parent study on it at Love It. And I think it's really, really wonderful. It's kind of talking about, in its own way, building leadership in your kid. And it talks about how, as parents, sometimes we think we have to tell the kids what to do, help them, make sure they get their homework done, make sure just like kind of manage, right? And force them to do the thing that we think is going to lead to them being leaders. But they recommend thinking of a parent as a consultant. If you are in the business world, if you're a consultant, somebody's going to come, they're going to bring their problems to you, you're going to help them understand their options, but you're not doing the work for them. And so you're helping them explore, why, helping them explore how, but you're not going to, if they don't do it, they don't do it, I guess. They still have choice about their life. Another podcast, this is the one I was just talking about. Alison Gopnik is a child psychologist, I think at Berkeley, but you'd have to check that. But she has several podcasts, one on Hidden Brain, and the one I just recently listened to was on A Slight Change of Plans. But she has also a book where she compares parenting to carpenters, which is this idea of kind of hammering, right? We're going to force them into a certain shape. We're going to make sure like they get so many hours of music lessons, so many hours of athletics, they're doing like, because if they can do all these things, they're going to be this certain way. And that doesn't really work. And so she has the metaphor of a gardener of what can you do to till the soil to make the opportunities, to make the base of everything, that unconditional support, that ability to explore, what can you do to till that soil so that, and give them, the water, give them the sunlight, make sure they have what they need so that they're going to grow. But it's different than kind of the carpenter metaphor.
Oh, I love that. That's just huge, right? That reframing of your role as a parent can be really powerful if we don't take anything else away, right? That's a big takeaway in itself. I think you also notice, or you mentioned this idea of like, as parents, if we're going to reframe that, it does require trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, but what if you, what if you choose wrong?
Yeah.
And I think, is there any encouragement you can give to parents, who would be like, that just feels too scary to me?
Mm-hmm. I think the encouragement is, for me, it's not about just you. Like I think I know parents have a lot of pressure to like I am solely responsible for how this kid turns out. And like we are hopefully in community with a lot of others. And so like your child is in good hands, not just with you, but with their teachers, with your friends, with if you have a faith community, or what are those places where you're getting support and like they have all of these people to go to help kind of, I don't know, bumpers. Like if you think of bowling, like you are not the only things keeping your child on track. Like there are all these other people who are going to kind of bumper them on their way. So they're going to eventually make it to the end and hopefully, get what it spare strike. What is the one where you get all 10?
Full strike. Well, and I think, that's such a good way to kind of summarize, right? It's like the kid is the ball. All we're doing is like we've sort of sent them down the lane and they're gonna have those bumpers. They're gonna roll their own way, and that they are capable of knocking down the pins, right? They've been made just the right way to do that. And I love what you said earlier about it helping kids just kind of gear their mind towards what they have inside them to be a person who can influence positive change. That just feels so right on. Is there anything else kind of in the last few minutes that you would want to share with parents about things that they should do, or recap anything that we've said?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about exploring and getting to know your kid, and helping them understand themselves too. I think it's hard. It's hard growing up. You might remember from yourself, like you don't always know who you are. And so I think helping them understand what makes them come alive, helping them figure out where they want to lead is also just a process of helping them figure out, make meaning of their world. And so doing that through, I'm just thinking about, this was a story I had sent you, but I had a student who he stepped on an ant probably not the first time, but as a second grader realized he had stepped on an ant for the first time and was really upset about, well, what does this mean? Like, am I a bad person? What am I, like felt really sad about it. And his mom reached out to me. And again, this might like sound weird, but it's like, this is an opportunity to lead. Like, this is an opportunity to figure out like, who am I in the world and how do I want to show up? And like, what gifts can I bring to the situation I find myself in? And so I kind of walked the mom through some things and said, like, give him some options. Ask him, like, try and figure out what is really like bothering him about it, and like what give him some options of like, what are ways that you might want to respond knowing that you did cause some pain, right? And I think that's a situation, whether we're adults or kids, we can all like recognize the need for leaders to take responsibility when we cause pain. So I think the lesson translates, but it turned out that he wanted to like leave some food. He was like, for the rest of the ants. So he like got some breadcrumbs or whatever and left some food for the ant colony near his house, to try and, show that he was making up for what the harm that he had caused. And so just even in these little moments, just helping them think through who are you? What does it mean to be you? How do you want to show up? And how can you impact positive change?
Oh man, that's so awesome. I feel like, I tried to put together some resources of what you shared, but if there are more, we can post them on the YouTube channel to make sure that we've got all this. But Jennifer, thank you so much. What a great way to start off our week, thinking about leadership, thinking about how we can help our kids recognize that they are empowered people in the world who can do the right thing and model that for others. And I think, for those of you who are watching, if you've got any feedback for us, you can scan that QR code and send it to us, and I'll send feedback to Jennifer too if you mention her. We've got this on YouTube if you missed it, and please share it with anybody you think might be interested. I also have a podcast. It's called What Great Teachers Know That All Parents Can Use. And so if you like a podcast format, you've got that and up on Apple and Spotify. And next week, we've got Getting to Know Your Adolescent with Jennifer Rose. And we'll close today just saying, Jennifer Arnold, thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise and your wisdom. And hopefully we will inspire this next generation to lead together.
They're already doing a great job, so we're just here with them. Thank
Absolutely.
you so
All
much
right.
for having me, Payne.
Absolutely. Have a great one.
All right.